Tunisia, February 19, 1943, 1400 hours, and Major General Karl-Wilhelm von Schlieben, commanding the German 18th Infantry Regiment, watches through his field glasses as American troops advance across the rocky terrain near Kasserine Pass, when suddenly his veteran Wehrmacht soldiers, men who had conquered Poland, France, and fought the Soviets, begin reporting something impossible through their field radios, claiming every single American rifleman appears to be armed with some kind of automatic weapon, not the bolt-action rifles German intelligence had promised, and von Schlieben realizes with growing horror that his entire tactical doctrine, built around the superiority of the MG-42 machine gun with riflemen in support roles, is about to collapse under a wall of semi-automatic fire from thousands of M1 Garand rifles, each American soldier capable of delivering 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute, and in this moment the German Vair-mahkt, the Japanese Imperial Army, and the Italian Regia Marina are about to learn that the United States has achieved something no other nation managed in World War II, arming every single infantry soldier with a semi-automatic rifle, transforming each GI into what the desperate Axis forces would soon call a one-man fire support team. The story of how the M1 Garand shocked the Axis powers begins not on the battlefield but in the workshops of Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, where a soft-spoken Canadian-American inventor named John Cantius Garand had been laboring since 1919 to create something military experts deemed impossible, a reliable semi-automatic rifle robust enough for general infantry issue, and by January 1936, when the United States Army officially adopted his design as the United States Rifle Caliber 30 M1, no other major power had come close to this achievement, with Germany still committed to their Karabiner 98K bolt-action rifle, Japan fielding the Type 38 and Type 99 Arisaka rifles, and Italy equipped with the Carcano M1891, all manual bolt-action weapons that required the shooter to physically operate the bolt between each shot, losing their sight picture, breaking their firing position, and limiting their rate of fire to perhaps 15 rounds per minute for an experienced soldier. The Germans had built their entire infantry doctrine around the MG-42 machine gun, a devastating weapon capable of firing 1,200 rounds per minute, which they called the squad's Hauptwaffe or main weapon, while individual riflemen with their Karabiner 98K rifles were considered merely ammunition carriers and security for the machine gun team, and this doctrine had served them well through the lightning victories of 1939 through 1941, crushing Poland in weeks, France in 6 weeks, and driving deep into the Soviet Union because against enemies similarly armed with bolt-action rifles, the MG-42's overwhelming firepower could dominate the battlefield, pinning down entire enemy platoons while German maneuver elements flanked and destroyed them. But what German military planners never imagined was facing an enemy where every single soldier could deliver rapid, accurate, sustained fire. When Springfield Armory began mass production of the M1 Garand in 1937, they could only manage 10 rifles per day, but as war clouds gathered over Europe and Asia, the United States government poured resources into expanding production capacity, and by January 10, 1941, 11 months before Pearl Harbor, Springfield Armory had reached 600 rifles per day, a figure that would have seemed impossible just 4 years earlier, while Winchester Repeating Arms Company received an educational production contract for 65,000 rifles to establish a second production line, because American military planners understood something the Axis powers had missed, that in modern warfare, the individual rifleman's firepower could be just as decisive as crew-served weapons. The Japanese military, despite their impressive victories in China and their bold technological innovations in naval aviation, remained wedded to the concept of spiritual superiority overcoming material disadvantages. Their infantry armed with the Type 99 Arisaka rifle, an excellent bolt-action weapon but still requiring manual operation for each shot, limiting soldiers to 10 to 15 aimed rounds per minute, and their tactical doctrine emphasized Bushido spirit, bayonet charges, and individual marksmanship over volume of fire, while Japanese military intelligence, reading American publications like the American Rifleman, was actually aware of the M1 Garand's development but dismissed it as typical American over-reliance on technology rather than warrior spirit, a miscalculation that would cost them dearly when they faced the reality of American firepower in places like Guadalcanal, Saipan, and Okinawa. The Italians, despite being a major Axis power, entered World War II with an army that was, in many ways, still equipped for the First World War, their standard infantry rifle being the Carcano M1891, a design dating back 50 years, and while Italian soldiers would fight with remarkable courage in the harsh conditions of North Africa, They would find themselves hopelessly outgunned when facing American forces armed with M1 Garand rifles, particularly during Operation Torch in November 1942, when American forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, bringing with them hundreds of thousands of these semi-automatic rifles that would fundamentally change the balance of firepower in the Mediterranean theater. Production of the M1 Garand accelerated dramatically after Pearl Harbor, with Springfield Armory implementing round-the-clock shifts, workers sleeping in the factory between shifts, and by January 1944, the peak of production, Springfield Armory alone was producing 122,001 rifles per month, which breaks down to 3,936 rifles per day, or 164 rifles per hour, every hour 24 hours a day, while Winchester repeating. Arms Company added their production capacity, eventually manufacturing 513,880 rifles by war's end, bringing total World War II production to 4,040,802 M1 Garand rifles, a staggering achievement in industrial mobilization that no other nation could match. The German Wehrmacht first encountered the M1 Garand in significant numbers during Operation Torch, when American forces landed in North Africa in November 1942, and the initial German reaction was dismissive, with Wehrmacht officers arguing that their tactical doctrine, centered on the MG-42 machine gun, made the individual soldier's rifle relatively unimportant, but this attitude began to change during the Tunisia campaign, particularly after the battles around Kasserine Pass in February 1943, where German commanders noticed something disturbing in their after-action reports. American infantry units were generating far more sustained fire than German intelligence estimates suggested possible, and investigation revealed that every American soldier, not just specialists or elite units, was armed with a semi-automatic rifle capable of sustained rapid fire. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in North Africa, recorded in his papers that American material superiority was becoming overwhelming, not just in tanks and aircraft but in the individual firepower of their infantry, where a single American rifle squad could generate the sustained fire equivalent to what would require 2 or 3 German squads, and this firepower advantage, combined with American radio-controlled artillery support, was making traditional German infantry tactics increasingly costly and ineffective, forcing German units to rely more heavily on their dwindling supply of armored vehicles and elite formations rather than standard infantry operations. The Japanese first encountered the M1 Garand in significant numbers during the Guadalcanal campaign, beginning in August 1942, where United States Marines, though initially still partially equipped with older Springfield M1903 bolt-action rifles, were increasingly armed with the M1 Garand, and Japanese soldiers, accustomed to facing Chinese forces armed with a hodgepodge of obsolete weapons, were shocked by the volume of aimed fire American troops could deliver, with Japanese after-action reports describing American riflemen as being equipped with some kind of light machine gun, not understanding that this devastating fire was coming from standard infantry rifles, and this shock was particularly severe during the numerous Japanese night attacks and banzai charges, where American troops with M1 Garands could deliver devastating defensive fire, each soldier firing 8 rounds as fast as they could pull the trigger before reloading. By the invasion of Saipan in June 1944, the United States Marine Corps was fully equipped with M1 Garand rifles, and Marines discovered that Japanese forces were still unfamiliar with the weapon's characteristics, particularly its 8-round capacity compared to the 5-round capacity of most bolt-action rifles, leading to a tactical innovation where Marines would fire 5 rounds, then quickly relocate while the Japanese thought they were reloading, then engage with the remaining 3 rounds from a new position, causing confusion and casualties among Japanese forces who had been trained to exploit the reload pause of bolt-action rifles. The Italian Army's experience with the M1 Garand was perhaps the most demoralizing of all Axis forces, as Italian soldiers, already suffering from inferior equipment, poor logistics, and questionable leadership, found themselves facing an enemy whose individual soldiers possessed firepower that Italian doctrine reserved for specialist units, and during the final battles of the North Africa campaign, particularly in Tunisia during early 1943, Italian units reported being suppressed by what they believed was machine gun fire, only to discover it was coming from individual American riflemen with M1 Garands, contributing to the collapse of Italian morale that would lead to the surrender of 275,000 Axis troops in May 1943, including vast numbers of Italian forces. The technical advantages of the M1 Garand over Axis bolt-action rifles were overwhelming and quantifiable, with the M1's gas-operated semi-automatic action allowing a trained soldier to deliver 40 to 50 aimed rounds per minute at 300 yards, compared to 15 rounds per minute for a skilled soldier with a Carabiner 98K, 10 to 15 rounds per minute with a Type 99 Arisaka, and similar rates with the Italian Carcano M1891, meaning that in any given firefight, an American rifle squad could deliver roughly 3 times the aimed fire of an equivalent Axis squad, not counting the additional firepower from American automatic weapons, and this advantage was even more pronounced in defensive situations, where American troops could deliver devastating volumes of fire against attacking enemy forces. The M1 Garand's N-block clip system, feeding 8 rounds of 30-06 Springfield ammunition, was initially controversial within American military circles, as some officers preferred a detachable magazine system, but in combat, the N-block clip proved highly effective, allowing rapid reloading with a simple downward push of the loaded clip into the receiver, and while the distinctive ping sound of the ejected empty clip became legendary, with stories of German and Japanese soldiers trying to exploit this audio cue to attack when Americans were reloading. Veterans from both sides later admitted this was largely myth, as the chaos and noise of combat made such subtle sounds virtually inaudible, and American soldiers quickly learned to throw empty clips to create false reload sounds, luring enemy soldiers from cover. German efforts to develop their own semi-automatic rifle in response to the M1 Garand began with the Gur 41 in 1941, but this weapon, hampered by German High Command's insistence on not drilling gas ports in the barrel, used a complex and unreliable gas trap system similar to early Garand prototypes that John Garand himself had abandoned, resulting in a weapon that was heavy, unreliable, and expensive to manufacture, with only 13,000 produced before it was abandoned. And when German forces captured Soviet SVT-40 semi-automatic rifles during Operation Barbarossa, German designers essentially copied the Soviet gas system to create the Gur 43 in 1943, but even this improved design came too late and in insufficient numbers, with only 400,000 produced compared to over 4 million M1 Garands. The Wehrmacht's planned deployment of the Gur 43 called for 19 rifles per infantry company, with 10 equipped with telescopic sights for designated marksmen. But this goal was never achieved due to production delays, material shortages, and the increasing disruption of German industry by Allied bombing, and even when available, the Gur 43 never achieved the reliability or widespread issue of the M1 Garand, remaining a specialist weapon rather than the standard infantry rifle, while German forces increasingly turned to the revolutionary STG-44 assault rifle, recognizing that the traditional bolt-action rifle was obsolete on the modern battlefield dominated by automatic and semi-automatic weapons. Japanese attempts to copy the M1 Garand resulted in the Type 4 rifle, also known as the Type 5, a direct reverse engineering of captured American rifles rechambered for the Japanese 7.7 by 58 mm Arisaka cartridge, but Japanese engineers struggled with adapting the in-block clip system to their ammunition, eventually replacing it with a fixed 10-round magazine loaded with 2 5-round stripper clips, and production began at the Yokosuka Naval Arsenal in late 1944, but by war's end, only 125 rifles had been completed out of 250 sets of parts manufactured, none of which saw combat, representing Japan's failed attempt to match American infantry firepower through technological mimicry rather than doctrinal innovation. The impact of the M1 Garand on small unit tactics was revolutionary, fundamentally changing how infantry combat was conducted, as American squad tactics evolved to maximize the firepower advantage provided by universal semi-automatic rifle issue, with fire and maneuver tactics becoming far more effective when every soldier could deliver suppressive fire, not just designated automatic riflemen, and American infantry could maintain continuous pressure on enemy positions with one element providing rapid suppressive fire while another maneuvered, then switching roles seamlessly, a flexibility that Axis forces, dependent on their limited number of automatic weapons, simply could not match. During the D-Day invasion on June 6, 1944, the M1 Garand's superiority became horrifyingly clear to German defenders, particularly at strongpoints like WN62 overlooking Omaha Beach, where Heinrich Severloh, a young German machine gunner, would later claim to have inflicted over 1,000 casualties with his MG-42. But even his devastating fire could not stop American troops armed with M1 Garands from eventually overwhelming the position, as American soldiers could deliver accurate suppressive fire while advancing, something impossible with bolt-action rifles, and by the end of D-Day, German commanders were reporting that American small unit firepower exceeded all pre-invasion estimates, contributing to the failure of German counterattacks that might have driven less well-armed forces back into the sea. The psychological impact of facing universal semi-automatic rifle fire cannot be underestimated, as Axis soldiers, trained and experienced in fighting enemies armed with bolt-action rifles, found their tactical assumptions shattered when every American soldier could deliver rapid, sustained fire, and German veterans later recalled the shock of realizing that American troops they had pinned down could immediately return heavy fire without the characteristic pause of bolt-action operation. While Japanese soldiers, whose tactical doctrine emphasized closing to close combat where their spiritual superiority could overcome material disadvantages, found themselves cut down by devastating defensive fire before they could close the distance, each American defender capable of firing 8 aimed rounds in the time it took a Japanese soldier to chamber a second round. The M1 Garand's reliability in harsh combat conditions further amplified its advantage over Axis weapons, as the rifle functioned reliably in the freezing cold of the European winter, the mud of Italy, the sand of North Africa, the humid jungles of the Pacific, and the coral dust of island battlefields, while German reports from the Eastern Front indicated serious reliability problems with their Gur-43 rifles in extreme cold, and Japanese forces found that their complex Type 4 rifle project could not achieve the reliability needed for tropical combat conditions, leaving Axis forces increasingly dependent on their obsolescent bolt-action rifles, even as the firepower differential grew more apparent with each engagement. American production quality and standardization meant that parts from any M1 Garand were interchangeable with any other, allowing field maintenance and repair that kept weapons operational even after extensive combat use, while Springfield Armory and Winchester Repeating Arms Company maintained strict quality control despite massive production volumes, ensuring that rifles produced in 1944 were as reliable as those made in 1941, a consistency that Axis powers, with their increasingly disrupted production and declining material quality, could not match, particularly as Allied bombing destroyed German industrial infrastructure and Japanese industry struggled with material shortages due to submarine warfare. The Battle of the Bulge in December 1944 provided perhaps the clearest demonstration of the M1 Garand's decisive impact, as German forces, launching their last major offensive on the Western Front, encountered American troops who, despite being surprised and often outnumbered, could deliver devastating defensive fire with their M1 Garands, and German after-action reports repeatedly emphasized that American small unit firepower made traditional infantry assault tactics prohibitively costly, forcing German commanders to rely increasingly on armor and artillery rather than infantry action. But with fuel shortages and Allied air superiority, these assets were increasingly unavailable, leaving German infantry to face the withering fire of American semi-automatic rifles with only their bolt-action Karabiner 98K rifles in response. The M1 Garand's 8-round and block clip, while occasionally criticized for not allowing partial reloading like the 10-round detachable magazines of the Gur-43 or SVT-40, proved superior in combat conditions, as the clip system was virtually immune to dirt and damage that could render detachable magazines useless, and the positive retention of cartridges in the N-block clip meant that soldiers could carry ammunition loose in pockets or bags without fear of damaged magazine lips or lost magazines, a significant advantage in the chaotic conditions of combat, where soldiers might need to resupply from battlefield pickups or share ammunition with squad mates. Production statistics tell the story of American industrial supremacy, as Springfield Armory alone produced 3,526,922 M1 Garand rifles during World War II, while Winchester Repeating Arms Company added 513,880 rifles, for a total production of 4,040,802 rifles, compared to approximately 400,000 Gur-43 rifles produced by Germany using slave labor and declining quality materials, while Japan managed only token production of their Type 4 rifle, and Italy never developed a semi-automatic rifle at all, continuing to field their 50-year-old Carcano M1891 design until their surrender in 1943. The training advantage provided by standardized issue of the M1 Garand cannot be overlooked, as every American soldier, whether infantry, artillery, support troops, or even Army Air Forces personnel, trained on the same weapon, creating a universal familiarity that meant any soldier could effectively employ the M1 Garand if necessary. While Axis forces had to train different troops on different weapons, with only selected units receiving semi-automatic rifles when available, creating logistical complications and reducing tactical flexibility, as German units equipped with Gur 43 rifles required separate ammunition supplies, maintenance procedures, and training programs from the majority armed with Karabiner 98K rifles. Field Marshal Albert Kasserine, commanding German forces in Italy, reported to the German High Command that American infantry firepower, anchored by universal M1 Garand issue, was making traditional defensive tactics increasingly costly, as German positions that should have been able to hold against battalion strength attacks were being overwhelmed by company strength American units, whose concentrated semi-automatic rifle fire could suppress German positions while maneuver elements flanked them, forcing German forces to rely increasingly on prepared fortifications and obstacles rather than mobile defense, surrendering tactical initiative to the Allies and contributing to the slow but inexorable Allied advance up the Italian peninsula. The Japanese response to encountering the M1 Garand evolved from initial shock to desperate adaptation, as Japanese forces on islands like Iwo Jima and Okinawa increasingly relied on elaborate cave and tunnel systems where the M1 Garand's range and accuracy advantages were minimized, forcing American forces into close-quarters combat where Japanese soldiers hoped their perceived spiritual superiority could overcome American material advantages. But even in these conditions, the M1 Garand's semi-automatic fire proved devastating, as American soldiers could rapidly engage multiple targets in confined spaces where the delay of operating a bolt-action rifle could prove fatal. Marine Corps adoption of the M1 Garand proceeded more slowly than the Army, with many Marine units still partially equipped with M1903 Springfield bolt-action rifles during the early Pacific campaigns, but by the invasion of Saipan in June 1944, the Marine Corps was fully equipped with M1 Garands, and Marines quickly developed tactics to maximize the rifle's advantages, including the previously mentioned technique of exploiting Japanese unfamiliarity with the 8-round capacity, and the ability to deliver rapid defensive fire proved particularly valuable during the massive Japanese Banzai Charge on July 7, 1944, where 3,000 Japanese soldiers attacked American positions, only to be cut down by concentrated M1 Garand fire, with American casualties numbering less than 1,000 against 4,000 Japanese dead. The Italian campaign provided unique challenges that demonstrated the M1 Garand's versatility, as American forces fought through mountains, river valleys, and urban environments, each requiring different tactical approaches, but in all conditions, the M1 Garand's combination of power, accuracy, and rapid fire proved decisive, whether engaging German machine gun positions in the mountains above Cassino, suppressing enemy strongpoints during river crossings, or clearing buildings in urban combat, where the ability to quickly engage multiple targets without operating a bolt gave American soldiers a critical advantage in the split-second encounters of room-to-room fighting. German prisoners of war interviewed by American intelligence officers consistently emphasized their shock at American small unit firepower, with one Wehrmacht sergeant stating that his unit believed they were facing an entire American company when in fact they were engaged with only a reinforced squad, because the volume of aimed rifle fire was so far beyond what German tactical doctrine predicted from such a small unit, and this perception problem persisted throughout the war, leading German commanders to consistently overestimate American strength and request reinforcements against what they believed were superior numbers but were actually similar-sized units with superior firepower. The economic impact of achieving universal semi-automatic rifle issue extended beyond the battlefield, as American war production, focusing on a single standardized infantry rifle, achieved economies of scale impossible for Axis powers trying to produce multiple weapon types in smaller quantities, and the simplified logistics of ammunition supply, maintenance parts, and training materials reduced the burden on America's global supply chain, allowing more resources to be devoted to other critical war materials, while Axis powers struggled with the complexity of supporting multiple incompatible weapon systems with increasingly scarce resources. By late 1944, even elite German units like the Waffen-SS found themselves outgunned by regular American infantry formations, as the firepower advantage of the M1 Garand, combined with American artillery, armor, and air support, created a combined arms superiority that no amount of tactical skill or combat experience could overcome, and German veterans later recalled the frustration of executing tactically sound maneuvers only to be driven back by the sheer volume of American fire, where every rifleman could contribute to suppressive fire rather than just designated machine gunners, fundamentally changing the mathematics of infantry combat. The influence of the M1 Garand extended to Allied forces as well, with British and Commonwealth forces still largely equipped with the bolt-action Lee Enfield rifle, occasionally expressing envy at American firepower, though the British maintained that their rifle's 10-round magazine capacity and smooth bolt action partially compensated for its manual operation. But even they recognized that the future belonged to semi-automatic rifles, leading to post-war development programs that would eventually produce weapons like the L1A1 SLR, while the Soviet Union, which had attempted widespread issue of the SVT-40 semi-automatic rifle with mixed results, carefully studied American success with the M1 Garand for their post-war small arms development. The M1 Garand's success influenced post-war military thinking globally, as every major military power recognized that the bolt-action rifle was obsolete as a primary infantry weapon, leading directly to development of weapons like the German G3, the Belgian FN-FAL, and eventually assault rifles like the Soviet AK-47, all attempting to match or exceed the firepower revolution that the M1 Garand had initiated, and even the United States military, developing the M14 rifle to replace the M1 Garand, essentially created an updated version with selective fire capability and detachable magazine, acknowledging that John Garand's basic design was so sound that it needed only minor improvements rather than complete replacement. The human cost of the M1 Garand's firepower advantage can be seen in casualty statistics, where American infantry units consistently achieved favorable casualty ratios against Axis forces despite often attacking prepared positions, a reversal of the traditional 3-to-1 advantage defenders were supposed to enjoy, and while many factors contributed to Allied victory, including air superiority, artillery, logistics, and intelligence, veterans from both sides acknowledged that the M1 Garand's firepower gave American infantry a decisive tactical advantage in the countless small unit actions that ultimately determined the outcome of campaigns. General George S. Patton's famous statement that the M1 Garand was the greatest battle implement ever devised was not mere hyperbole but recognition of how this single weapon had revolutionized infantry combat, providing American forces with a decisive advantage that no Axis power could match. And while German innovation produced revolutionary weapons like the STG-44 assault rifle and Japanese determination created tactics like the kamikaze, neither could overcome the fundamental firepower imbalance created by America's ability to arm every single infantryman with a reliable semi-automatic rifle. The story of Heinrich Severloh, the German machine gunner at WN62 overlooking Omaha Beach, provides a microcosm of the M1 Garand's impact, as despite his MG42 machine gun's theoretical superiority with its 1,200 round per minute rate of fire, he could not stop American infantry armed with M1 Garands from eventually overwhelming his position, because while his machine gun could dominate specific areas, American soldiers with their semi-automatic rifles could deliver suppressive fire from multiple positions simultaneously, gradually reducing his ability to control the battlefield until his position was overrun, a pattern repeated thousands of times across every theater where American forces engaged the Axis powers. The legacy of the M1 Garand extends far beyond World War II, as the rifle continued to serve in the Korean War, where Chinese and North Korean forces, many still armed with bolt-action rifles, experienced the same shock German, Japanese, and Italian forces had faced a decade earlier, and M1 Garands remained in service with American allies for decades, with some still in use by ceremonial units today, a testament to the reliability and effectiveness of John Garand's design, which achieved something military planners had thought impossible, providing every ordinary soldier with firepower that previously required a specialist weapon. The industrial achievement of producing over 4 million M1 Garand rifles while maintaining consistent quality standards represents one of the great success stories of the arsenal of democracy. As American workers, many of them women entering industrial employment for the first time, mastered complex manufacturing processes to produce rifles that would function reliably on battlefields around the world, and the fact that M1 Garands manufactured in 1941 were still serving effectively in 1945, despite years of combat use, demonstrates the quality achieved even under the pressure of maximum production, a standard that Axis powers, with their declining industrial capacity and increasing reliance on slave labor, could never match. The ultimate vindication of the M1 Garand came not from American sources but from the enemies who faced it, as German military studies conducted during the war acknowledged that American infantry firepower, centered on the M1 Garand, had fundamentally changed infantry combat, Japanese military analysts recognized that their failure to develop semi-automatic rifles had left their forces at a critical disadvantage, and Italian officers, many of whom would later serve in NATO forces equipped with American weapons, understood that their bolt-action rifles had been obsolete from the moment American forces landed in North Africa, and these acknowledgments from defeated enemies provide the strongest testimony to the M1 Garand's decisive impact on World War II. The transformation of the American infantryman from a rifleman with firepower comparable to his enemies into a semi-automatic gunner with 3 times the sustained fire capability fundamentally altered the balance of military power, as the United States demonstrated that industrial capacity properly directed could provide technological advantages that no amount of training, experience, or determination could overcome. And while courage, leadership, and strategy remained essential to victory, the M1 Garand ensured that American soldiers would never face enemies with superior individual firepower, an advantage that contributed significantly to Allied victory and established principles of infantry armament that continue to influence military thinking today. The M1 Garand rifle stands as more than just a weapon, but as a symbol of American industrial might and innovative capability, representing the ability of a democracy to mobilize its resources and outproduce totalitarian states that had spent years preparing for war, and every M1 Garand manufactured at Springfield Armory or Winchester Repeating Arms Company carried with it the potential to save American lives and defeat fascism, a responsibility that American workers took seriously, maintaining quality standards despite tremendous pressure to increase production, ensuring that soldiers and Marines could trust their rifles in the most desperate combat situations. The Axis powers' failure to anticipate or match the M1 Garand reveals fundamental flaws in their military planning, as German overconfidence in their tactical doctrine, Japanese emphasis on spiritual factors over material reality, and Italian inability to modernize their forces all contributed to their defeat. And while each nation had its strengths, none recognized until too late that the era of the bolt-action rifle had ended the moment the first M1 Garand rolled off the production line at Springfield Armory, forever changing the nature of infantry combat and contributing to the destruction of fascist ambitions for world domination. In the end, the M1 Garand's greatest achievement was not its technical specifications or production numbers but its democratization of firepower, taking capabilities previously reserved for specialists and providing them to every American soldier, whether a Harvard graduate or a farm boy from Kansas, a New York banker or a California fruit picker, each armed with the same semi-automatic rifle that gave them firepower superior to most enemy soldiers they would face, embodying American ideals of equality and demonstrating that democratic nations could not only match but exceed the military capabilities of totalitarian states, contributing to a victory that preserved freedom and established principles of infantry armament that continue to influence military forces worldwide.